Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. All right, my next guest is a good friend of mine, a guy whose show that I was recently on not too long ago, co-founder of Front Yard Fantasy and the co-host of the Fantasy Football Game Show. Definitely should check that out. But my man, Simon Grunewald. Simon, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on, brother.
What's up? Thank you so much for having me. You were an absolute blast as a guest on our stream, came in and beat us at our own game. So it's nice to get a chance to come over on your show into your house, your dojo.
Yeah, man. I mean, it was, like I said, had a ton of fun with you guys playing what was fantasy trivia?
We played horse, yeah.
Horse, horse. I almost said hangman. I don't know why.
Hey, that's an idea. Maybe we need to be doing some hangman over there.
But yeah, fantasy football horse. So definitely check Simon and the rest of the guys out. But Simon, that is not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your beloved, and I say beloved because they did you well last year. Your beloved Cleveland Browns. What a season it was for Cleveland in their first year under head coach Kevin Stefanski. Led the Browns to an 11-5 record, their first winning record since 2007, and their best record since 1994. And similar to that 94 season, they make it to the divisional round of the playoffs. Do end up losing, unfortunately, this time to the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Browns took a major step forward, not just as an organization, but as a football team. Simon, what are the vibes around this Cleveland team as we head into 2021?
I mean, first of all, you read in those years, it's just still kind of surreal to me, the season we just had. Like, I was born in 94, and I've been a Browns fan. Like, this is truly a completely new experience for me, like cheering for a competent NFL team. So last year was so cool. The vibes around the Cleveland team, there's like serious excitement because you look at the roster from top to bottom, offense, defense. This is a balanced, complete, talented roster that the Cleveland Browns have. It's not just kind of fluky that they went 11-5 last year. I know they get some flack. There's some doubters out there. They lost to the Ravens twice, lost to the Jets in week 16. Like 7 of their wins were against teams with losing records. Like I understand all that, but it was a new head coach with a weird offseason. And if you look at the roster, it's the real deal. The secondary was weak last year, but they addressed a lot of those issues in the offseason. And I think the biggest thing for Cleveland is they had arguably the best offensive line in the entire league last year, and they're returning all 5 starters. And they've got a guy who was a rookie last year who showed up, who should take a step forward. Having that kind of offensive line really caters to the kind of offense that Stefanski wants to run, and I imagine they're going to take even more steps forward this year. I'm expecting big things from them.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what Cleveland was able to do. Even upon hiring Kevin Stefanski, Cleveland was one of my immediate picks to make the playoffs as a surprise team to make the playoffs. Actually cashed out on that bet last year. So, Cleveland was, I mean, when you look at what they built, you look at what Kevin Stefanski was bringing with him in terms of the personnel, and just look at the steps that the Browns had made in terms of the personnel office in the front office, really taking that step into analytics and really diving into it to the point where, it was reported during the interview process that they were going into head coaching candidates' playbooks with red pen and just saying, nope, this play doesn't work. This play, take it out, things like that. And so when when they went to that level of detail and that level of just ingenuity in terms of how they were building this team, I really looked at this Browns team as a team that was taking a step forward, and they did that. And so you look at the quarterback position, that's typically where it all starts. And so Baker Mayfield entering his 4th season with the Browns after a down year 2, we saw him put a season together that statistically resembled the one that he had as a rookie, looked comfortable running Stefanski's West Coast offense that utilizes multiple running backs and tight ends and more emphasis on the run game and play action pass game. And this is an offense that seems to really suit Baker well. He was the, quarterback 22 in terms of fantasy points per game at 15.5, but he was much better in the second half of the year, most notably when you start looking at week 7. And a lot of people may look at me weird saying, John, there was weeks between weeks 8 and 10, he didn't even throw a touchdown pass. Why are you including these? Well, those games were all terrible weather conditions for the
Unbelievably
Browns.
bad weather.
Unbelievably bad weather in 3 consecutive weeks. They played in either high winds at 25 to 35 mile per hours or heavy torrential downpour, or one game against the Houston Texans, they actually faced both. So if you remove these weather games from that equation, he's actually at 20 PP or 20 fantasy points per game, and that would have been good enough for a QB8 performance. So Simon, I have to ask you, what's the value on Baker Mayfield right now, going off the board as the QB 25 in redraft leagues? Is there any value here with Baker? Or, is he needs somebody who deserves some more respect from the fantasy community?
Yeah, I mean, in single quarterback leagues, he's a streamer. Like that's what he is. Just by the nature of what Stefanski runs, I think Baker is a good quarterback. Not great. He's not a world beater, but he's good, and that's what the Browns and pair him with a smart head coach that knows how to use players properly. Unlike Hugh Jackson or any of the other mess that we've had in there. Kevin Stefanski will make Baker Mayfield successful on the field as an NFL quarterback. For fantasy, that may not translate to super valuable. 25 though is a bit insane. I think he's a QB2 in Superflex. You should be drafting him as such, and he's a streamer in good matchups in one quarterback leagues. Like you mentioned, there was those weather games, but even with those games, he had the 11th highest QBR last year as well. Like he played well. And again, I don't think it's just Baker took a step forward. I think he got put in a system that was playing to his strengths and allowed him to function how he prefers to function. He's really good at hitting guys on open routes in stride, if they can find that. So it's all about creating those opportunities. And this run-first offense with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb in the backfield does a great job of creating those open receivers for Baker. We'll talk a little bit more about the receivers in a little bit, but I expect Baker to finish around where he did last year, next year, maybe a little bit higher without some of those bad weather games. But it is Cleveland, so they could very well just have some more of them. But yeah, Baker's definitely being undervalued.
Yeah, I misspoke a little bit. I had my notes mixed up. He was the 20 fantasy points per game would have put him at QB 12, so just inside of QB 1, and then he is going off the board as the QB 21, not the QB 25. Not a huge difference, but that puts him inside QB 2 territory. Me personally, I do think Baker is probably being slept on a little bit when you look at, again, a guy like Kirk Cousins, right? He finishes the QB 12 last year. Obviously, he has weapons in Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, but there's no reason why Baker Mayfield can't finish as somewhere between the QB 10 to the QB 15 on a yearly basis. I mean, especially in this offense, when you look at how it accentuates his strengths, like you were talking about, the play action pass game, getting guys open down the middle of the field. And then you consider the fact that, again, this is Baker's, now he's entering his second year in this offense with an off season. So he's going to be even more comfortable. And I think that's what we saw at the end of last year. It wasn't that the schedule was that much better or anything. It was just that Baker and the rest of this team was getting more comfortable in this West Coast Shanahan style offense. And so I like Baker's fit. I think that it's pretty good. I know what you said about it being Cleveland and everything, but the fact that those games happened back to back to back in 3 consecutive weeks, that's just bad luck if you ask me. And so that's not going to happen every year. And so I think Baker could potentially be a value. But you talked about the running backs before: Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, two-headed attack. They formed a nightmarish tandem for opposing defenses last year, specifically Chubb, who is honestly one of my favorite players in the entire NFL at this point. Man. One of the best pure runners in the entire league. He was the RB8 last year in PPR points per game, averaging 17.3 fantasy points per game. Did miss 4 games due to the MCL injury. But then you add Kareem Hunt, who was the RB21 with 13.7 PPR points per game, even handled lead back duties while Chubb was out with that injury. Likely to continue to have his role in the pass game, as he saw 51 targets last year in the pass game. But these guys are going off the board, RB9, RB35, respectively. How are we feeling about the value on these guys?
What they did last year, smash, is what they're going to do again this year. Kareem Hunt was league winning for me last year. I tried to tell people they're going to use both of these backs. Kareem Hunt's not there for no reason. He's unbelievably talented, and he's such a good pass catcher that there's room in this offense for both of these guys to be successful, especially in a system like Shanahan, or I said Shanahan, Stefanski runs. It's perfect for this two-headed attack. Now, am I calling for another year where they're both RB1s? I would never call for that. That's statistically improbable. But I think Nick Chubb's probably getting drafted. I say a little bit too late, but that's a reasonable place for him to get drafted. He's one of the best pure runners in the NFL. His upside is a little bit limited because of the lack of the passing game work. That's going to go through Kareem Hunt, and maybe some of these receivers are going to get the shorter yardage work. But Nick Chubb's a monster. He had 12 touchdowns in 12 games last year. Like, he only played 12 games, and you talked about he's number 8 on a points per game basis, but ignore points per game. He played 12 games, and he was the number 11 running back overall in PPR. Like that's insane. And that's with Kareem Hunt in the offense, healthy. Nick Chubb, slam dunk. Don't even worry about it. Draft him high. Draft him in the first round. You don't have to worry. Kareem Hunt, I understand why people are concerned. He did have disappearing games last year. He had 4 or 5 points. But a lot of his best games were with Nick Chubb in the game anyways. Like, it wasn't just Nick Chubb goes out for 4 games. Kareem Hunt is a monster. Nick Chubb comes back. Kareem Hunt disappears. A lot of those bad games were during the weather, like you talked about, like the poor weather that they faced. And Kareem Hunt's going to continue to be used in that pass-catching role. And this is a run-first offense. There's plenty of running opportunities for both of these backs. Kareem Hunt, you said, was being drafted at an ADP of 35, running back 35.
That's according to 4for4's aggregated ADP data. Yeah, RB 35.
I don't see a world where he finishes outside of an RB2. Like, I truly don't see how it's possible if he's healthy for 16 games with the improvements I expect from that offense above what it was last year already. And the kind of back that he is, he's going to be involved in every single game plan unless we get maybe horrible weather. And so it cuts off some of the passing game. Kareem Hunt is a locked and loaded RB2 with that RB1 upside. Like, if anything happens to Nick Chubb or if he gets some more work, he can blow up any given week. Not all the backs give you that upside with that same kind of floor in my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because last year, my co-host and I, we kind of got into it a little bit preseason, Kareem Hunt versus Nick Chubb. And the thing is, I was never making the argument that Kareem Hunt wasn't good. I was just making the argument that Nick Chubb is just too talented of a running back to not see most of the volume here.
Yeah.
And Kareem Hunt will still be involved. And the fact that we play in PPR leagues is good because he's still going to get that pass game work, which kind of played out exactly how I had kind of envisioned. But the thing that you were saying about Hunt now is Hunt's getting discounted because people are saying, oh, well, he's not good with, he's better without Chubb, or he's better with Chubb, or, you know, whatever the narrative may be with Kareem Hunt. The point is that he's still, he was injured last year, right? He had the groin injury that a lot of people may not necessarily remember or know about because we only remember when guys don't play. We don't remember when guys were injured and they did play. We just remember that they didn't produce for us when they actually played injured. And so Kareem Hunt was dealing with a groin injury at points last year. So I think that we should not hold that against him and kind of expect, like you were saying, for that role to still be there for him.
Yeah, 100% agree. I again, not calling for another RB1 finish from both of these guys. That very rarely happens, 2 RB1s on the same team. But I agree with everything you said. That role's not disappearing. They found success with it last year. They're not going to move away from it. It worked for Baker. It worked for the running backs. I'm excited to see it this year, and I will be drafting Kareem Hunt in the 3rd, 4th round in redraft leagues again. He's one of my favorite running back targets, especially if he's going 35th. That's bananas to me.
Yeah, and like you said, he's got that built-in upside that if, God forbid, anything happened to Nick Chubb, it's almost just seamless. He
can handle lead back roles. Yeah, it's not like a Chase Edmonds where all of a sudden his efficiency goes way down. Kareem Hunt can be a lead back in the NFL. No problem.
All right, let's move on to this wide receiver position. And honestly, for the Browns, it really is only 2 guys. No matter who they really add, I think it really just starts and ends with these 2 guys, and that's Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry. Let's start with OBJ. returning from the ACL injury, and this is a year after having dealt with the sports hernia injury. So he seems to be the forgotten man amongst fantasy players. Before the injury, he was the wide receiver 39 in fantasy points per game at just 12.4 PPR points per game. Jarvis Landry finished one spot ahead of him with 12.5 PPR points per game. Landry saw 101 targets in 2020, which he was able to convert into 840 yards and 3 touchdowns across 15 games. These guys going off the board as wide receiver 31 and 43 respectively. Simon, is there any value here?
Yeah, I feel like I keep saying this, but don't worry. On the next one, we'll get into someone that I'm not saying is value. But OBJ, I feel like there is value. I think there's this misconception that he's been a bad receiver since he's been in Cleveland, and he hasn't been. He's had him and Baker have not been connect, but he is one of the leaders in like uncatchable passes since he's been with the Browns. Just him and Baker have not been able to get on the same page. But when he's been on the field, he's been Odell Beckham Jr. He's been what we expect. And every time Baker got on the ball, we saw amazing things happen. It's just that connection wasn't quite there. The one thing I do want to say, there's this misconception or this narrative that the Browns are better off without OBJ on the team and they should ship him off because Baker played better without him. And I get what they're saying. Baker did play better without OBJ on the field, but it's not like correlation and causation, right? There's not a team in the NFL that's better off without OBJ on their team, and that includes the Browns. Like, no team gets better by getting rid of a wide receiver like Odell Beckham Jr. Now, what I love about OBJ this year is you saw last year, we've talked about it a bit, Stefanski knows how to use his players, and he's now had another year working with Baker. He'll have this whole offseason working with Baker and Odell. They're going to get in sync. Like, I believe in Stefanski as a coach, Baker as a quarterback, Odell as a wide receiver. They're going to get in sync. And if Odell's healthy, he's the one on the team. It's not Jarvis Landry. It's Odell Beckham Jr. And we're going to see that this year. Wide receiver 31 is low for me. He's at worst a wide receiver 2. That's what's going to happen. I don't know how you feel about it, but he's still OBJ. He's not the one that we saw doing one-handed catches in the back of the end zone, but he's still an unbelievably talented receiver. And Stefanski's going to work it out between him and Baker.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think my question, let's just start with this part. My question isn't whether Odell Beckham and Baker Mayfield can eventually find success as football players, because that narrative, like you said, the listeners they can't see me, they couldn't hear me. I was on mute, but I was dying laughing because that was a narrative that absolutely just drove me like absurd. It just drove me insane last year. The amount of times that people brought that up, like you said, there's no NFL team that is better without Odell Beckham on the field. I don't care who you are, what your receiver room looks like, who your quarterback is. It does not matter. Odell Beckham is one of the most talented players to play the wide receiver position that we have seen. So, I mean, I used to say this all the time. Odell Beckham, prior to Cleveland, was a 90, 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdown guy. That was what he averaged over his career. So, I mean, this guy, and then he goes out, throws 1,000 yards up with basically playing on one leg with his sports hernia injury. None of us really knew about it. And then, like I had talked about before, you enter the fact that Cleveland was learning a new offense in a season where there was no off season. There's, COVID was a big deal, and there's no offseason program. And so a lot of these guys learning this offense, some of them for the first time under these kinds of circumstances. And again, Odell, this is basically 2 years in a row that he didn't really have an off season. So I'm willing to say that if Odell Beckham, as long as he is healthy, and that's my only caveat, right?
Yep.
Getting a little bit older, coming off the sports hernia, now he's coming off the ACL. If he is healthy, I think we continue to see Odell Beckham. And I agree with you, Jarvis Landry. I think the only reason we saw the Jarvis Landry that we saw at 12.5 PPR points per game last year was because Odell Beckham wasn't present. This team is a run-centric football team. Even when Odell Beckham was healthy, he was still only seeing 6 targets per game. There's not going to be a lot of volume to go around.
Yeah, the days of Odell getting 150 plus targets are gone. That's not going to be the kind of player that he is anymore. You need to adjust your expectations. This is not Odell on the Giants when he first came into the league. It's going to be lower volume, but I completely agree with everything you said there. The one thing about Jarvis, though, you said he's being drafted as wide receiver 41. I believe is what you said.
Wide receiver 43.
43. He's going to finish higher than wide receiver 43. I'm not saying he's going to be a wide receiver 2. He'll probably land in that wide receiver 3-4 range, but he's going to be, or 3 range, sorry. He's going to be better than wide receiver 43. That's what he does. He'll be steady. He'll be fine. If Odell goes down, maybe his volume ticks up. He ends up in wide receiver 2 territory, but there's a bit of value there, but I think the upside's pretty capped with Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, I think Jarvis Landry is one of those guys that I would feel more than comfortable with him as my wide receiver 4 at this point, right?
100%.
Just scoop him up, put him on my bench. If I'm playing in a deep league with multiple flex spots, he could be one of those guys that I rotate in and out of that flex spot depending on the matchup with Cleveland. A guy who you alluded to it before, I don't think you want anywhere near your flex spot, let alone your fantasy teams. Austin Hooper was the tight end 1 for the Cleveland Browns in terms of targets and playing time. But again, this is an offense, like I talked about before when talking about Baker, utilizes a lot of 2 tight end sets. So guys like Harrison Bryant, David Njoku, they also get involved. And Hooper was tight end 21 in terms of fantasy points per game at 8.7, a long ways away from his tight end 3 finish just a year ago in Atlanta. But Hooper going off the board is tight end 23. I feel like I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it for the listener, Simon. Is there any value to extract here?
No, not one bit of value from Austin Hooper to extract. He was tight end 21 last year. I think that's what you said. And that it didn't even feel like that. And that's horrible. He was not good. And there's just, like we were talking about with the receivers, like we were talking about Landry a bit. If Odell Beckham's healthy, there's just not enough volume to go around for all of these pieces to be fantasy relevant. It's a run first team. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt can't both be RB1s and then have 2 receivers and a tight end all be fantasy relevant, right? It's just not going to happen on this kind of team, the way they have it structured, especially with what we hope is an improved defensive unit. Hopefully the Browns have a stronger defense this year. They're not having to score as much to keep up. But if Austin Hooper wasn't a poor tight end for the Cleveland Browns anyways, you mentioned Harrison Bryant. As a rookie tight ends, we know it's difficult for them to get going. And I don't know why the whole world is ignoring Harrison Bryant for the guys like Cole Kmet and Adam Troutman. These guys are like, maybe we saw something. We saw Harrison Bryant show up on the field as a good NFL tight end in the limited work we did see him do. In 11 of his 16 games, he was on the field for more than 50% of snaps. Like you said, they love to run those 2 tight end sets. And he looked like the better tight end, the better NFL tight end out on the field. This year, I think we're going to see even more of a transition away from Austin Hooper towards Harrison Bryant. And you have to remember, Harrison Bryant was a pass catching machine in college. Like that's his profile. He's going to take over as the primary pass catching tight end. And I know a lot of people are projecting it for the following season. I think we start seeing a lot more of that transition this year. And Austin Hooper's even worse than he was this past year. That Atlanta offense did wonders for him. That he owes Atlanta every cent he makes after this in the NFL because they made him look like a god out there. But he's just not. I think Harrison Bryant's the future there with the Cleveland Browns. And the future's a little bit closer than I think maybe people are expecting there.
See, I'm over here grinning, smirking. Again, listeners can't see it. They don't know why. They don't know what point it started. But it was when you brought up Harrison Bryant. Because I'm absolutely in love with the prospects of Harrison Bryant.
Me too.
I mean, he was one of my favorite tight end prospects coming out last year. I think I had Troutman 2. I think I had Bryant 3. And, when you watched, obviously, when he went to Cleveland, I was like, oh, why? Austin Hooper, big money deal. But I guess they're investing in the tight end position, whatever. And then like you had said last year, or like you said earlier, last year, there were points where Harrison Bryant was legitimately the best pass catcher on the field for the Browns. And so you look at him and, Austin Hooper's not the biggest guy, and he's probably not the most physical blocker. But if you look at him versus Harrison Bryant, which one of those guys do I want blocking? It's probably going to be Austin Hooper.
Yeah,
so that
100%.
Free up Harrison Bryant for some more of these targets. Like you said, you have it flipped. I mean, you have the passing of the torch happening quicker than people may think. I do too. I have Harrison Bryant leading all the tight ends in targets this year as we head into 2021. So when I say all tight ends, I mean all tight ends on the Cleveland Browns.
Cleveland Browns. Yeah, I was about to say, man, you love Harrison Bryant. Move
No.
over Travis Kelce. Harrison Bryant's in town.
No, but absolutely love Harrison Bryant this year. He's one of the guys I talked about it on the when we talked about the Buffalo Bills, but he's one of those guys in dynasty startups I'm scooping up like at the end of drafts because why not? He's just free and available.
He's being forgotten. I mean, out of like the rookie tight ends last year, he had the best season, and yet people aren't even just completely leaving him for dead. I guess it's situation. It's the Browns. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I 100% agree with you. I'm excited to see what he does this year. And disclaimer though, for anybody listening, I'm not saying draft Harrison Bryant as your redraft tight end in fantasy this upcoming year. Don't. Like I don't think any Browns tight end is going to be fantasy relevant enough this coming year for redraft. Maybe streaming options if you're in a pinch, but I wouldn't even draft Harrison Bryant as your redraft tight end. Maybe next year, but that's not because he's going to be worse than Austin Hooper. That's because I don't think there's going to be fantasy relevance from the tight end group in Cleveland.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is, right? Like two tight end sets, especially, they become two tight end offenses, I should say. They become unpredictable almost, right? Especially when you have two guys when the roles aren't as defined, right? Like,
yeah,
if you have a blocker and you have a guy who's more of a receiver, then obviously give me the receiver. But none of these guys really stands out as the blocker. Like I said, Austin Hooper is probably the guy I would want most to do it. But they cannibalize each other. I was playing Harrison Bryant a lot in DFS last year. You know, if you want to punt the tight end position, he was pretty cheap, and he was getting 3 targets a game. So it's just like, oh well. So definitely maybe if you want to check that out from a DFS perspective. But
I hope you played him his 2 touchdown week against Cincinnati. That would have been a good week to play some Harrison Bryant.
You know what? I feel like I did, but I feel like the rest of my lineup was crap, so it didn't.
So you saved money, but you spent it on garbage.
Yeah, pretty much, right?
Perfect.
Simon, man, this was awesome, brother. But before I let you go, I got to ask you one last question. How is this division breaking down, and how's this division breaking down? Who's winning it? Where are the Browns finishing?
Well, before I say who wins it, I'm going to say I think the Browns and Ravens both make the playoffs. This is a 2 minimum team playoff division. I think it's going to be a race between those 2 teams to see who comes out on top. It's going to come down to who wins the games between those 2 teams, I think. I hate being a homer, man, but when I look at the Browns roster from top to bottom after the moves they made this past year, how competitive they were towards the end of the season once they got clicking with the Ravens, right? This whole team, the offense has improved, the defense is much improved. I got to go with the Browns winning the division. Ravens a close second, Steelers third, Bengals fourth is how I see it breaking down. But the Ravens and the Browns will be in the playoffs.
Hey man, two teams through this divisional breakdown already, and the Cleveland Browns are 2 for 2. So,
so I'm not too big of a homer, at least.
No, man. Maybe I need to reassess. I mean, it's definitely going to be close. I mean, the way I got it, I got Baltimore just eking it out. But it's going to be close. It's going to be close for sure.
If you told me the Ravens won this division, I 100% believe it. They're an excellent team as well, but it's going to be close between those. This will be a fun division to watch. I mean, because then you've got the Bengals. I don't even know what to expect from them. So I'm excited to just see how this whole division plays out. It's going to be a fun one next year.
Definitely going to be a fun one. Definitely excited to talk about. But Simon, man, I appreciate you coming on, brother. I definitely do. Why don't you let everybody know where it is they can find you, where they can find your content at Front Yard Fantasy, and how they can find your work, man.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, before I do that, John, thank you so much for having me. I love coming on and talking with you, and then I got to talk Browns as well. That's an awesome time. If you are looking for my work, you can find me on Twitter at FYF Simon. And then our Front Yard Fantasy Twitter account is at Front Yard FYF. We go live Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube and on Twitch, playing the fantasy football game show. We have a bunch of different games we play. John came on and played some fantasy horse with us. We do a poll-based game. We do some fantasy quiplash, brackets, tiers. We just have a good time in the middle of the day. So check that out. That's on YouTube at Front Yard Fantasy. We're on Twitch at Front Yard Fantasy as well. And if you follow the at Front Yard FYF Twitter account, you'll see all of our great hosts and co-hosts listed there. It's a good group of guys.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Make sure y'all check that out. Those guys are Front Yard Fantasy. Simon, John Luke, and the guys are a good crew, man. So definitely want to check that out. So, Simon, again, appreciate you coming on. Everybody, hope you enjoyed the breakdown, and we will catch y'all later. Peace.
See ya.